What if the only thing standing between you and total bankruptcy was a crazy idea from a stranger? Hugo lost everything. With no home, no job, and a daughter to look after, he found himself trapped between hunger and despair. But when the owner of a bankrupt restaurant gives him a plate of food, Hugo sees something that no one else sees. One last chance. What he does next not only transforms the restaurant, but completely changes his destiny. But can a risky game and an unknown voice really save everything? Stay until the end to find out. "Dad, you won't believe what happened today." Hugo looked up when he heard his daughter's excited voice. Sophia ran up to him, her backpack swinging on her back. Her smile was radiant, and for a moment Hugo felt a twinge of relief. "So tell me, my love," he said, forcing a smile. "The teacher said my essay was the best in the class. She praised me in front of everyone." Sophia spoke quickly, her eyes shining with pride. Hugo took his daughter's hand and they started walking. "I knew you could do it. I've always known that my princess is the smartest." He squeezed her hand a little tighter. Sophia's feeling of happiness contrasted with the anguish burning inside him. How could he say he didn't know where they would sleep that night? They crossed the street and turned the corner, avoiding the school's main exit. Hugo knew that the other parents would look down on him, judging his worn-out appearance. "Are we going to Ricardo's today?" asked Sophia, already knowing the answer. "Yes," Hugo replied, unable to hide the weight in his voice. Ricardo's restaurant was the only place they could get a hot meal, and Hugo knew he couldn't afford to refuse help. When they arrived, the aroma of food took over the air, and Sophia inhaled deeply. "That smells good," she said excitedly. Ricardo was behind the counter, filling large pots with hot soup. As soon as he saw the two of them, he waved. "You're right on time. Have a seat." Hugo and Sophia settled down at a table. Ricardo served the dishes and sat down next to them. "You're an angel, Ricardo," said Hugo gratefully. "No need to thank me," replied Ricardo. "The problem is that I may not be able to do this for long." Hugo frowned. "What do you mean?" Ricardo sighed and looked at the steaming pots. "The restaurant is going from bad to worse. Customers are dwindling, bills are piling up. If things don't improve soon, I'll have to sell up." The news hit Hugo like a punch in the gut. "You can't. This place is the only thing that keeps some people on their feet." Ricardo let out a sad laugh. "Do you think I want this? But the truth is, I've tried everything. Promotions, discounts, nothing works." Sophia looked from one to the other, trying to understand the weight of the conversation. "And if the restaurant closes, can we still come here?" she asked quietly. Hugo didn't know what to say. Ricardo also remained silent, his gaze dark. "Look, tomorrow I'm going to get some answers. Maybe a miracle will happen," said Ricardo, trying to lighten the mood. Hugo nodded, but his mind was already working fast. He couldn't miss that restaurant. As they finished their meal, Hugo watched Sophia talking animatedly to Ricardo about his essay. Her laughter filled the space, but Hugo felt a tightness in his chest. He had to find a solution. That evening, as they walked to the makeshift shelter, Sophia squeezed her father's hand. "It's going to be okay, isn't it?" Hugo looked at his daughter and forced a smile. "It will, my love. I promise." Inside, he didn't know how he was going to keep that promise. The cold wind nipped at Hugo's skin as he adjusted the thin blanket over Sophia. The small makeshift tent protected them from the wind, but not from the relentless cold of the early morning. "Dad?" Sophia's sleepy voice broke the silence. "Yes, my love." Hugo leaned over, smoothing his coat over her. "Will we have a house again one day?" The question hurt more than any wound. He hesitated before answering. "Of course we will. I promise." The girl closed her eyes, seeming satisfied with the answer, but Hugo knew that empty promises wouldn't put a roof over their heads. He lay next to his daughter, looking up at the makeshift roof of the tent. He thought about Ricardo, about the restaurant, about what he could do. Then the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the deserted street. "Hey, are there people in there?" The firm voice made Hugo jump to his feet. The canvas of the tent suddenly opened, revealing a policeman. His serious expression left no room for argument. "You can't stay here. Leave now." "Please," Hugo tried to explain. "We just need a place to sleep." The policeman crossed his arms. "This is not a public shelter. If you don't leave now, I'll have to take you with me." Hugo's heart raced. "What about my daughter?" he asked, dreading the answer. "If you're arrested, the social services will take care of her." Sophia, now awake, held her father's hand tightly. "Dad, what's going on?" Hugo swallowed. "It's all right, my love. Let's get out of here, okay?" With quick movements, he collected his few things and put his backpack on his back. He held Sophia's hand and left the grounds without looking back. The city slept as they wandered through the streets. The closed shop windows reflected their ghostly images. Sophia walked in silence, without complaining about the cold or her tiredness. After a few hours, they arrived at Ricardo's restaurant. The lights were off, but the back door leading to the storeroom was ajar. "Let's just stay here until dawn," whispered Hugo. He tucked Sophia into a corner with some flour sacks as a pillow. "Dad, I'm hungry," she murmured. He stroked her hair. "Tomorrow, my princess. Tomorrow you'll eat something delicious." Soon afterwards, Sophia fell asleep. Hugo stayed awake, his mind buzzing with possibilities. In the early hours of the morning, the door to the storeroom opened suddenly. Hugo was startled. "What are you doing here?" asked a female voice. Hugo blinked, trying to process the figure in front of him. It was Isabella, Ricardo's daughter. I'm sorry, we didn't have anywhere else to go." Isabella's eyes moved from Hugo to Sophia, who was curled up asleep. Her hardened gaze softened a little. "My father told me about you," she sighed, crossing her arms. "He left earlier today. I'll look after the restaurant while he's away." Hugo nodded, not knowing what to say. "You can't sleep here," she continued. Hugo felt the floor disappear. "I see, we're leaving now." Isabella bit her lower lip, hesitating. "But you can stay until I open the restaurant. After that, I can't promise anything." Hugo let out a relieved sigh. "Thank you. That means a lot to us." She nodded, then looked around. "Since you're here, at least help me with a few things." "Whatever you want," said Hugo without hesitation. Isabella pointed to a pile of boxes. "I want to organize this stock before noon." Hugo stood up and started loading the boxes. As they worked, his mind began to formulate a plan. Maybe that restaurant was the key to changing everything. Hugo wiped the sweat from his brow after stacking the last box in the warehouse. Isabella, who was organizing the supplies, glanced over and crossed her arms. "You work fast. Years of experience carrying problems on your back," joked Hugo. She let out a short laugh, but soon returned to seriousness. "Now that you've helped, what's your plan?" Hugo looked at Sophia, who was still sleeping on the sacks of flour. He couldn't wait any longer. "I know your father is thinking of selling the restaurant, but what if there was another solution?" Isabella arched an eyebrow. "What solution?" Hugo approached the counter and picked up a blackboard that was leaning against the wall. "Traditional promotions aren't working, right? But what if we create an experience? Something that makes customers come for the curiosity and stay for the food." She narrowed her eyes, interested. "Go on." "How about a challenge? The customer orders a surprise dish and before eating has to guess the name. If they get it right, they win the meal and a free soft drink." Isabella crossed her arms, pondering. It could work. But what if everyone gets it right? Hugo smiled. "I doubt it. With a different presentation and unexpected ingredients, we could make it difficult. Besides, whoever gets it wrong pays. In the end, the number of hits will be less than the number of misses." She bit her lip thoughtfully. We've never done anything like this here. Exactly, that's why it can work. That's why it... Isabella took a deep breath, then picked up a chalk and wrote on the blackboard, "Order a surprise dish and try to guess. If you guess right, the meal is free." She looked at Hugo with a slight smile. "Okay, let's give it a try." Hugo felt a weight come off his shoulders. If this worked, he might have secured more than just a meal for Sophia. Minutes later, the restaurant opened its doors. The movement began timidly until a customer stopped in front of the blackboard. "Is this serious?" asked a man in a suit, intrigued. "Very serious," replied Hugo. "Would you like to try?" The man shrugged. "Why not?" Isabella prepared a special dish and placed it in front of him. "What's the name of this dish?" she asked. The customer smelled the food, tasted a bite, and thought for a moment. "Chicken lasagna." "Wrong," said Isabella. "It's a chicken escondidinho with ricotta cheese." The man smiled, thinking it was funny. Almost. All right. It was worth a try. Over the next few minutes, more curious people joined in and took part in the challenge. Some even got it right, but most got it wrong. Word spread quickly, and before noon, the restaurant was fuller than Isabella had ever seen it. She cast a surprised glance at Hugo. This is working." "I told you it would work," he replied, satisfied. As the day went on, Hugo realized that Isabella was not only good in the kitchen, but also had charisma with the customers. He watched her smiling and chatting as she served the dishes. "You have a talent for this," Hugo commented as they cleaned the counter. "Cooking to charm people. That's what makes a real restaurant." She laughed, looking away. "Thanks, I guess." The day ended with more customers than in recent months. When the doors were locked, Isabella leaned against the counter, exhausted but satisfied. "My father will be shocked when he hears about this." "I hope so," said Hugo, feeling the exhaustion hit. Isabella sighed, looking at him. "You can stay in the storage room for now. Just don't mess anything up. I promise you won't even realize we're there." She nodded, and before leaving gave him one last look. "Good night, Hugo," he smiled. "Good night, Isabella." Sophia was sound asleep when Hugo lay down next to her. He ran his hand through his daughter's hair and closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he felt that they were on the right track. Hugo watched as the restaurant filled up, satisfied with the impact of the challenge. However, something was bothering him. Although traffic had improved, he knew they needed something more to ensure the survival of the business. The next day, when they tried out a new idea, they realized that the juice-guessing game didn't have the same effect. Few customers were interested. "We need something that attracts more attention," said Hugo, crossing his arms. Isabella sighed, leaning on the counter. "Like what?" He looked at her for a moment, remembering something Ricardo had mentioned. "You like music, don't you?" She frowned. "I do. But what's that got to do with it?" Hugo smiled. "What if the restaurant had live music?" Isabella blinked in surprise. "Are you suggesting that I sing?" "Yes. It would give the restaurant a unique identity." She took a step back. "I've never sung for anyone but my father." "Then start with me and Sophia." She hesitated, but the excitement in Hugo and Sophia's eyes made her take a deep breath. "That's fine. But if it's awful, we'll never talk about it again." That night, in the storeroom, Hugo picked up an old guitar from the corner and strummed a few chords. "When you're ready." Isabella closed her eyes for a moment before she began to sing. Her voice was sweet, full of emotion. Hugo felt a shiver run through his skin. Sophia clapped her hands when the song ended. "You sing like a princess." Isabella laughed, a little embarrassed. "It wasn't so bad." "It was incredible," said Hugo, genuinely impressed. The next day they put up a new sign at the entrance. "Live music. Guess the song and win a dessert." The impact was immediate. Customers came in to see who was singing and stayed to enjoy the experience. Isabella, despite her initial nervousness, soon gave in to the performance. Hugo couldn't help but smile as he watched her sing. The customers applauded at the end of each song and tried to guess the titles to win desserts. The restaurant had never been so full. Later, while they were cleaning the hall, Isabella looked at Hugo. "That really worked. I knew it would. You're talented." She looked away, smiling. "Thank you, Hugo." Sophia, who was helping to stack the plates, observed the exchange of glances and smiled mischievously. "You like each other." Hugo and Isabella looked at each other, blushing. "Sophia," began Hugo, scratching the back of his head. "What?" "It's true," said the girl, laughing. Isabella laughed too, shaking her head. "We'd better finish cleaning up before your father dies of embarrassment." Hugo shook his head, smiling. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he belonged somewhere. When Ricardo arrived home from his trip, he stood in the doorway of the restaurant, perplexed. It was busier than ever, and his daughter was on the small makeshift stage, singing to a lively crowd. Hugo, who was collecting empty plates, noticed him and smiled. "Welcome back, Ricardo." Ricardo blinked, still taking in what he was seeing. "What happened here?" Hugo laughed. "We saved the restaurant." Ricardo looked around the crowded room, reading the chalkboard announcing the night's live music. "And you got my daughter to sing." "That was her idea," said Hugo, crossing his arms. Ricardo snorted, but Hugo saw a glint of pride in his eyes. "I never imagined she'd have the courage." "She's talented. The restaurant needed that." When Isabella finished the song and saw her father, she ran to him. "Dad, you won't believe it, but the restaurant is doing very well." Ricardo hugged her, smiling. "I can see that." Sophia appeared next to them, holding a glass of juice. "Mr. Ricardo, can we come here all the time now?" Ricardo looked at Hugo, then at his daughter. Then he smiled. "And I'd say this is a bit more than a restaurant for you now, wouldn't you?" Hugo cleared his throat a little awkwardly. "Well," before he could finish, Sophia smiled mischievously. "Can Isabella be my new mommy?" Isabella turned red, and Hugo almost choked. Ricardo laughed out loud. I had already realized that something was going on. Hugo scratched the back of his head awkwardly. "It's nothing like that." "Oh yeah?" teased Ricardo. "Then why is it red?" Isabella slapped her father lightly on the arm. "Stop that!" Ricardo laughed again and shook his head. "Look, Hugo, not only did you save the restaurant, but you also brought something I didn't even know my daughter needed." Hugo met Isabella's gaze and saw the same hesitation and expectation he felt. "Well, maybe it's something I need too." Ricardo patted him on the shoulder. "Just don't make me regret trusting you." The next few days were full of hard work, but also of happy moments. With the restaurant thriving, Hugo and Isabella spent more and more time together. One evening, while they were cleaning the kitchen, Hugo looked at her and took courage. "Isabella, would you like to go out with me one day?" She raised an eyebrow. "We already go out every day. I mean, really, like a date." She smiled, pretending to think. "I think I might consider it." He laughed. "Is that a yes?" "That's a maybe." Sophia appeared in the doorway, crossing her arms. "If you don't get together soon, I'll sort it out myself." They both burst out laughing. Time passed, and Hugo not only found a home, but a new family. He and Isabella stayed together, and the restaurant became a reference in the city. Ricardo retired, leaving the management to the two of them. Years later, Sophia had a baby brother, and Hugo was sure that his promise to his daughter had been fulfilled. They finally had a home.